Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, any agreement, there are some good things in it, and there are some bad things in it. There are some questionable things in it. For me, the most problematic aspect of this agreement is that, again, after year 15, there will be no restrictions at all on Iran on their producing highly enriched uranium. They are home free. They are essentially legitimized as a threshold state. That bothers me, because if this were a deal that truly stopped Iran from having a nuclear weapon, then I would feel a lot more comfortable. I am very uneasy with the fact that this, again, doesn't stop Iran from becoming a nuclear state. It simply postpones it to 15 years from now. Mr. Goldenberg, how do you react to what I just said?
Thank you, Congressman. I agree that that is the weakest element of the agreement, is the fact that 15 years from now certain limitations go away. But I think a number of limitations do stay. First, for the next 15 years, we are going to have clarity into what Iran's research and development program will look like afterwards and during these 15 years, and it can't start until year 8 or 9. And if Iran wants to make any changes to that program, the United States will have to approve those, because there will be a board that includes the United States that would have to actually, and that has to vote by consensus. That means on any changes to Iran's R&D program, we all need to approve it. So we have a veto. We also are going to have 15 years of access to their civilian nuclear program and what they are planning on doing and how they are doing it on various elements that are non-nuclear related. There is a long history of working with other countries through 123 agreements, through various mechanisms, so you get a full picture of what their scientists look like, what their plans are. And if we get to year 13 or 14 and this looks all very bad, there are plenty of opportunities then to start working with partners, reimposing sanctions, looking at other options at that point. And we still have also the most important part for an Iranian sneak out, which I still believe is the most important question here, is can they build the HEU separately? That's what they're going to need to do. They're going to need a covert facility where they can actually spin centrifuges and enrich uranium. They're not going to be able to do that for at least 25 years because they're not going to have the capacity, because we're going to have 25 years of monitoring of everything, the entire supply chain, from the moment it comes out of the ground all the way to the very end. That's one of the strongest elements of this agreement. And that lasts a lot longer than 15 years. So I agree it's imperfect. I wish it could be better. I think all of us do. But I think, as I think members here know better than anybody, tough negotiations, whether it's a piece of legislation or an international agreement, are never perfect. You always have to make sacrifices, as you wisely pointed out, Congressman, and this is where we are. I still think it's far superior to the alternative.
Thank you. Another part of it that's problematic to me is we were told at the beginning that this would only be a discussion about Iran's nuclear program, that we couldn't raise their support for terrorism, and we couldn't raise the mischief in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and all the things they do with support for Hezbollah, for Hamas. And then we see the agreement, and we see that suddenly there's a 8-year limit on ballistic missiles and 5 years on arms sales, which effectively changes the United Nations resolutions, and suddenly that element of it was put in, which didn't pertain to nuclear weapons, and that was problematic. Anybody care to talk about that? Mr. Dubowitz?
Ranking Member Engel, that is fundamentally the problem. This is not a 15-year deal. In some respects, I would think this is an 8-year deal. And you need to look at this deal through the prism not only of nuclear physics, but economics, sanctions, heavy weaponry, and ballistic missiles. And what the Iranians have done is they've negotiated an agreement where on the front end of this agreement, they're effectively dismantling our sanctions regime. That means that they're going to get hundreds of billions of dollars to spend on not only building their economy, but building economic resilience against future economic pressure. They're getting the money to buy battle tanks and combat aircraft and attack helicopters. They're getting money to develop an ICBM program. That's all front-loaded in the beginning. And so by year 8, you've effectively got arms embargo off, ballistic missiles off, all of the sanctions terminated, including congressional sanctions. And now what Iran has done is it's hardened its defenses and hardened its offenses. And so only then at that point does the restrictions on R&D and the nuclear physics sunset provisions start kicking in. But at that point, what Iran has done is they've effectively hardened themselves defensively economically. They've built a powerful ICBM program over time. And as well, regionally, because of the lifting of the arms embargo, Iran is now a regional powerhouse, sowing chaos in the Middle East. At that point, what they can effectively do is use the nuclear snapback to threaten to walk away from the agreement unless we do not reimpose sanctions. So it's a front-loaded agreement for Iran where they get all the benefits up front, and we're hoping down the line, 10, 15 years, that we'll be in a position to respond to a much more powerful Iran, nuclear-wise, militarily, ballistic missiles, and regionally.
Let me finish by asking one more question, another thing that I have concerns about, and that is the inspections. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action describes a system in which Iran permits 24/7 monitoring of declared facilities. Now, for sites that may have undeclared material, Iran might be able to delay inspections, the way I read it, for up to 24 days. Does 24 days provide timely access?
Well, Ali Heinonen testified with me yesterday before Financial Services. He was asked the same question, and he was asked to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 the inspection regime. He said on declared facilities, it's a 7 to 8. On suspicious sites, it's a 5. And on access to facilities where Iran would be engaging in the manufacture of a nuclear weapon, he ranked that as 0. And so that the issue here is that there are 3 types of sites where we will want to get into. And it's suspicious sites and sites where they're building a nuclear warhead, where Dr. Heinonen said at best it's a 5, and with respect to a warhead design it's a 0. I would make one other comment, Congressman Engel. It's not about verification and inspection only. It's about enforcement. The IAEA doesn't enforce. The United States of America enforces. And what I see from this agreement is what the Iranians have designed themselves is effectively they've immunized themselves against American enforcement, which means that they can actually stymie and stonewall the IAEA, and they're going to be actually depending on we're going to be in a position where we're going to have to enforce the agreements that the IAEA can get into these sites. If I'm Iran, what I do is I play around with the dispute resolution mechanism and the Joint Commission, because right now it's 5 to 3, and all I have to do if I'm Iran is flip one European country. And I will flip one European country by using the nuclear snapback, threatening nuclear escalation if anybody reimposes sanctions on me, including in an enforcement situation. So they flip one seat, it's 4 to 4, and you basically stymied the Joint Commission, and now you're in a situation where it's not going to just be 24 days, it's going to be much, much longer.
Mr. Goldenberg, on inspections, is your opinion similar or different?
Well, I view it a little bit differently, Congressman, because my perspective is the reality is any suspicious site that we find, we're going to have eyes on realistically in most cases before the IAEA even has eyes on it through our intelligence community and through the intelligence communities of our other partners. That's the other redundant piece of this. We'll have satellites, we'll have various other mechanisms where we can do this. And Ambassador Joseph brought up Parchin before. The Iranians have been spending years trying to clean up Parchin now. They would have 24 days in this scenario to clean something up. And the reality is that we already saw this in the case of Iraq. In the case of Iraq, what we actually caught in terms of inspections was inspectors moving things out of the facilities because we had satellites on them. If the Iranians start behaving in a suspicious fashion, we'll see it. And then the only other thing I'll say is, by far the most important part of the inspections in my mind is the fissile material. Because the reality is, yes, the weaponization is the nastiest piece. It's obviously for a nuclear weapon. But the fissile material, the reason we focus so much on the fissile material is because you need a factory, you need industrial size capability that's very difficult to hide in order to get that fissile material. A nuclear core and a weapon does nothing for you if you don't have the material to use in it. And so I think that you do have to look at these various pieces, but the real choke point is the fissile material, which is where the agreement is focused on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ileana Ros-Lehtinen of Florida.